You're listening to episode 770 of a VerySpatial podcast, September 28th, 2025.
And all of those ticking clocks are only there for the nostalgia. Always thought this was made to last, but now it's in the past, and it might be for the best, but it's still pushing down on my chest. I told you so many times, don't go.
Hello and welcome to our VerySpatial podcast. I'm Jesse.
I'm Sue.
I'm Barb.
And this is Frank.
And this week we're going to be talking about some stuff. But first, news.
So first up in the news, some remote sensing news. The NISAR, so NISAR mission, released their first test photos. So the satellite launched in July and I believe is targeting November for full commission. But it's a joint mission between NASA and ISRO, so the Indian Space Research, I forget what the O is, organization. And it is a synthetic aperture radar satellite. So I think if I remember from reading, it's actually the first sort of U.S. one since CSAT, which was one that the Navy had launched way back when on a satellite. So we had the shuttle radar mapping mission and there have been other SAR satellites, but there was just a weird quirk about that. But in any event, the first test images are out, which is generally what they do during the diagnostic period. So once the satellite's up and running, they start running tests, process some data, make sure everything's going great. But it's pretty exciting because this is also, I think, the first satellite that has L-band and S-band on the same device. So L-band is kind of a lower frequency and then S-band a little bit higher. And essentially what they're going to do is, with this mission, is take a look at not just ground surface changes. So SAR is pretty good at that, measuring, the heights to give you terrain and topography, but also looking at changes in ice cover and stuff. So pretty cool. I didn't see in the releases that I saw when and where data will be available, but hopefully once the full commissioning, the diagnostic period is complete, that we'll get more info on that. So that's the NISAR mission, and you can check out the link or head over to NASA to see more info.
And probably also eventually available on Earth Explorer.
Yes.
Hopefully.
Yes.
I mean, we don't want to get into a mini topic about the other NASA news that came out this week, or certainly since the last time we recorded, about the priorities of the agency. But as is most things in U.S. government right now, it's all very fluid.
He said we weren't going to talk about it, so we're not going to talk about it.
Well, I mean, we can talk about it.
No, we're not going to talk about it. Largely because I haven't looked at it, so I don't know. Niantic, huh?
Yeah, Niantic, creator of Pokemon Go, announced at their 10-year anniversary. Yeah, their 10th anniversary for Kojima Productions that they were looking at creating basically a Pokemon Go type geospatial Death Stranding game based on the franchise. I'm hoping that Sue has more to add to this because it's not something I've played, but I know it was big news in the gaming community.
I just saw the one trailer.
So it looks like it's an attempt to go more augmented reality. We're waiting to see, of course, what it is. This is just an announcement of an announcement. That's all that was given. They had a nice, lovely trailer that looked like the ideal Pokemon Go. The irony here is that, of course, all of the game division from Niantic either has been or is being sold to another gaming company because they're like, we just want the data and we've got the data. So here, somebody else deal with the games. And so we're still waiting to see what the outcome of that's going to be long-term to Pokemon Go. But yeah, it is curious that they're now looking at that. And I think it's because of the mashup of AI and AR with the geospatial data that Niantic, was Niantic. And I guess we're saying Niantic, but this is specifically Niantic Geospatial or Niantic Spatial, sorry.
Yes, it's Niantic
not Geo.
Spatial.
But we also should say, of course, that Niantic Spatial is a spinoff from Google via Google Earth via, of course, their acquisition of Keyhole. So the folks in charge of Niantic Spatial were the founders or the people who sold Keyhole to
John
Google.
Hankey. Is that how you say his name? Yeah, was a big player there, and I think he was the one that joined Kojima at the presentation. Yeah.
So it's kind of we don't know yet. but it looks interesting.
So the really interesting thing for me here is I don't know the game at all, even though it's 6 years old now at this point. It
Wait,
was
are you talking about Death
originally
Stranding or Pokemon Go?
I'm talking about Death Stranding.
Okay.
I don't know much about the game, even though it's 6 years old at this point. But the interesting thing about the Death Stranding game is that they have this social strand system, which I think is kind of fascinating, and it encourages people to build connections socially. And I think that would be a really interesting dynamic to add to the general Pokemon Go equation. So that'll be kind of fun if they explore that a little bit. I don't know they are, because like you said, it's an announcement of announcement. So we'll see if anything comes of that, but that's kind of neat.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just amusing myself imagining a whole bunch of older people playing it, but just like Pokemon Go got a lot of older people out and moving and doing things. And I'm not imagining Death Stranding to be their type of game.
Well, yeah. We'll see what happens. There's a lot of question marks, and that's because there's no actual news other than a lovely trailer that doesn't actually say anything.
Which is pretty on brand for Kojima.
It is fair, and the visuals are pretty on brand for Niantic, so it's pretty much on brand, as you say, all around.
Earthmover, a company that focused on climate data, has pivoted to focus on a smaller timescale, focusing on how climate affects daily life and weather. This is a move to make themselves stand out in a space where there are so many people and companies in this area. So now they're going to be focusing on urgent solutions for things like weather and fire. They felt like the data before was sort of static, and in this way, they hope that they'll be focusing on things that can change more.
I think the really interesting bit here is this paragraph that's kind of in the middle of the link in the show notes, where one of the founders says that they're really focusing on the data structure that underpins it. That's their core product still. And they say in geospatial, they call it a raster. In AI, they call it a tensor. In old school Fortran, they just call it an array. Basically, what he's saying is that their new data structure allows you to do more analysis and make more of these connections, presumably more than a raster or a tensor or an array. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But
and like many products like this, they're focusing on top of open source projects and data. And they say that this is a way for the businesses they work with to keep their own data and their own storage. But it also shows, again, that we rely still on all these open source tools and data that are out there.
And that's it for the news.
It's out of order, and all of us ticking clocks are only there for the nostalgia. Always thought this was made to last, but now it's in the past, and it might be for the best, but it's still pushing down on my chest. I told you so many times.
And on to the web corner. UN Maps has unveiled their UN Maps Learning Hub. It is a place to learn open geospatial. It's in support of the United Nations, but it's a really good repository for anyone looking for multilingual ways, Arabic, Chinese, English, French, Russian, and other languages, to do tutorials and online study on open source like QGIS training and other software that's out there. So it's a pretty good layout and well structured, and I've just been starting to explore it.
I was just going to say, I hadn't seen this before, but I am going to check it out for sure.
Only there for the nostalgia. Always thought this was made to last, but now it's in the past, and it might be for the best, but it's still pushing down on my chest. I told you so many times.
So we have geography and geospatial technologies, and they're things that we talk about all the time. But we also normally talk about them in the context of other things as well, because they, I think, are currently a geography and geospatial technologies, one of the main linking factors between many things. Spatial data, the idea of where, the use of the tools, expanding the whole idea of the spatial turn through the social sciences and humanities in the last couple of, 3 decades or so, all kind of link the ideas that we utilize every day in terms of geography much more broadly now. And so I think that's what I was hoping to talk about a little bit today, is just the ways that we see geography pulling so many different things together. And this is coming out of the fact that I've been writing assessment reports this time of year. I write all of our assessment reports, and our department got bigger. So that meant I'm also writing assessment reports for sustainability now. And of course, I was complaining, as you will, before class, man, I got so much to do. I got to do this. I got to do that. And some of the sustainability students who are in my geography class were like, well, why are you doing it? Well, because in our department, I'm the person who tends to write these things. And they seemed confused why a geographer would be doing this. But as I'm writing them, it just reinforces so much of the fact that a lot of the things that are in various disciplines are so much geography. So, they have a strong focus on things like systems thinking and such that, is kind of what geography does for a large part. We're pulling together the different pieces of the human environment interaction, looking at the politics, looking at the economics, looking at the sociocultural aspects. And so, that's kind of what got me thinking about that particular topic idea. Thoughts?
Okay, so I want to put a pin and remind me that I have a question later that I want to bring up.
We'll never remember that, but okay.
I know, but let's, I'll read. Hopefully our listeners will go, hey, Frank didn't ask a question, get on that. Because it could also be a topic level question in its own right. But however, I always, my, elevator pitch for geography and geospatial has always been, look, if it happens somewhere on the planet, then you can use geography to understand it, at least a little bit, at some level, the spatial relationships between whatever's going on. And everything happens somewhere on the planet. So we literally can use geography to understand at some level everything. That's sort of my elevator pitch. And I think that speaks to the broad theme of what you're talking about, how space, geography as we understand it, but I also think the fundamental space is a linking concept that brings in all these different pieces together.
The underlying bedwork, the bedrock that we sit upon.
And I remember a few years ago, I was attending a NSF panel where the NSF reviewers and others were talking about how they really like geographers and geospatial people to be involved with the work they did, not just specifically to the geospatial, but just overall, we tend to have a lot of overarching knowledge of so many fields because we're in them, and that we tend to be very able to just change with things, quickly grasp them, and to make those connections, because again, that's part of what we do as a discipline and a profession every day.
Minor note, NSF for our non-US listeners is National Science Foundation. I'm a programmer, so I do sometimes think in those terms in terms of analogies, but I kind of think of like geography as the universal API, because we have hooks for like everything. An API being application programming interface for those non-programmers. Is that, the way an API works is that we have an API has, these hooks that allow you to interface with any system in any way that you want to, and you sort of write the linking code to do that. We have all these hooks for like every other discipline. And I think that I was thinking about that when Barbara was talking about what NSF likes about what we do as a discipline is the fact that we do, because we're looking at space, we don't have the luxury of focusing on one domain area. Like we can't just say we're only going to worry about the economy, because you can't disaggregate the economy from the other parts of space. You can't pull that apart from culture. You can't pull that apart from politics. Now, I think it's fair to say that all the economists who are listening, all two of them, to this podcast would say, well, hold on a second. We talk about those things. But the point is that all the other disciplines, they have a very targeted focus, and they look at how those things might impact. But for us, it's a multi-layered approach. You can't really call this the dominant thing that I want to look at versus that. Not easily, despite the fact that we often do in many subdisciplines of geography.
And as Jesse pointed out, it's it's really hard, like you can't separate out that physical and human geography. That a lot of times that we are looking at that human environment interconnection. But I did want to say that I really appreciated the use of the term binding agent, because sometimes when you hear people say, no, geography should not be what you often hear people say as a bridge. It's a discipline bridge, because then the feeling is that means that you have to operate with and only in the context of these other disciplines rather than solely on working on your own things. But I think that being a binding agent shows more of the true relationship, so that it isn't that we are giving up our discipline in order to operate in these other areas. It's more that, we're already bound on, a binding agent within these disciplines. Does that sound like esoteric enough, or am I coming across with what I'm trying to say?
And to contextualize what she's saying, whenever I texted everybody the idea for the topic and put it into the show notes, it was geography as an interdisciplinary binding agent. So the fact that we do, connect so much, and, Frank's talking about it as hooks or allow others to hook into us. But I think we can equally, and he did to a large part actually, talk about how it's almost the opposite, that we're really good at hooking into knowledge from other areas and pulling it in to try to understand our spatial questions as well. So it's both that we're looking out and folks are looking in at this point.
So I just was thinking as we were talking it, and it may not actually be any kind of conscious thing, but it was curious. Back, a lot of us who are geographers, when you had to learn about your discipline, one of the ways our discipline got organized in the modern sense was through regional geography, which is exactly, what you're talking about, Frank, is that it's defined by the space. And within that, you look at all of the layers of interaction that are going on in both the natural and the human world and try to get that picture. And so that's an interesting, way. And one of the first things when geographers, young geographers to be or whatever, come into classes, there will often be a class that does that, gives you that perspective, right? That I look at space, and in this case, it's a chunk of the earth defined as a region, whatever that definition is. And here are all the myriad of processes and features and everything going on within that space. So already kind of looking at that approach.
It's kind of interesting. What was the class we took talking about the theories of geography? I forgot what the title was, but
Geographic traditions.
Geographic traditions. So when we took geographic traditions, I think it was kind of interesting. And they said, look, we started off with just regionalism, is that you're going to a place and you're documenting everything you could ever find about that particular space. And this evolved over time into looking at systemic approaches to thinking about space, right? And then, the one is the quantitative revolution, X and Y, they intersect at a certain point, and that's the probability matrix and blah, blah, blah. And then moving into, sort of a Marxist approach, and then moving into post-Marxist approach, even though we use the word structuralist and post-structuralist because Marxist is a scary word. But the point being that it's interesting. So Barbara and I both actually all of us come from something else. We didn't start off being geographers and became geographers that way. We came from other disciplines and bring in other ways of thinking about this stuff. And so Barbara and I both come from political science. And at the time when I was going through different programs, I was trying to discern the difference between history and political science, like where my mentality lie, what resonated more with me. And I didn't know at the time that geography is where it was, but that's what I was trying to sort out. And what was described to me as the political science is looking at the systemic trends, what's at the systemic level that seems to be impacting things, as opposed to historians who tend to get, dig very, very deep into a particular, time in history or a personality or whatever it may be. That's sort of the way it was depicted to me, for good or bad. But, it's kind of interesting that I've always struggled a bit with some of the stuff and methods, looking at those structural systemic approaches to thinking about space, because I did have issues with some of that political science approach stuff. We're looking at systemic trends and not paying attention to some of the details. The interesting things to me, which is one of the reasons I love geography, is it's okay to look at the complexity of the sausage making back behind the counter, to understand some of the forces going on. And I fear that some of the ways we approach this or way we talk about this doesn't acknowledge that as fully as I would like it to be.
I think if we look at the last 20 years, whether we're building on post-positivism, post-modernism, feminism, and the current ideas of phenomenology. I think a lot of these do what you're talking about. If we look at the 70s back, which is, of course, what we were hearing about as we were going through school, there were a lot of disconnects. But I hope that at least in the theory level classes that we're talking more and more about that aspect of the individual, as opposed to kind of having to create these broader overarching ideas, because laws are all nice and good for certain aspects of our world, but individuals, it's hard to maintain laws because things like culture, things like economics, things like politics change so rapidly that any laws that are agreed upon in one decade are going to be blasted out of the water the next decade. So I think we're moving more towards what you're hoping we're moving towards.
Yeah, I think so too. I agree. But there is too much of it, in my opinion, there's too much remnants of that around, looking at, we're going to look at just from a feminist lens or a structural lens or a post-feminist lens. And it's, I think it's important to highlight those things. I don't want to undercut that at all. It is important, but to remember it's a piece of the overall puzzle. There's a lot of stuff going on that is related to, but not 100% explained by that way of thinking. And that was some of the stuff that turned me off on some of the other disciplines that I was looking into and reading about, is that they tended to look at those, law-based way of thinking about the world. And that just struck me as non-tenable. Like you said, these things change over time and evolve. So that's one of the things that really attracted me to geography, is that, I've got a structure that allows me to think about it from this point of view today, and from this other point of view tomorrow, and this third point of view over the same 2 days. That is very attractive to me as a social scientist.
And I think, the movement into mixed methods so heavily over the last decade really reinforces that.
Yeah, I think, Jesse, that, for me, again, coming also from different disciplines, from journalism and political science, which, journalism has its own specific background and methods and approaches, which almost stand apart from a lot of other disciplines. But the most closely I found aligned was in geography, because of that different methods for getting to complexity, but the allowing creativity for how you explore it. So the learning about multiscalarity was such a big thing. I know it's something within geography, but to learn it as someone outside geography, it explains so many of the patterns that I was seeing. And then within geography, to have a focus on how the discipline's dynamic and always changing also was a foundational concept that is seemingly simple, but also one that you don't find in a lot of disciplines other than geography. And I think too, within, even just the geography realm, that the focus also on geospatial and GIS, which, with the geospatial term wasn't there, but is now there, you can see its presence in a way where it's integrated so much that you can see, looking back, you can't imagine a time when there was so much conflict, even though there still remains, debate, but you just see more coming out of the two intertwining together in order to give you that depth of knowledge and new knowledge.
On our campus, and of course I'm sure it's even more so on your campus, because we are a relatively small department, and generally geography is a relatively small department, we tend to support a lot of other degrees. And so we see a lot of students that are not or in our department, anthropology and geography students in our classes. We see them, but they're a smaller number proportionally of the whole student body. So we see, marine science and intel and sustainability, and, we can keep going down the list of everything from digital culture and design through to business, through to, so basically humanities, social sciences, we get them all in our classes. And it just kind of, especially the geospatial technology classes and the lower level core at our classes or on our campus, but general ed at most places. And so, yeah, it just kind of reinforces how much other departments look to what we do for what is happening in their own fields.
Yeah, and I think, and through the very long, history of the podcast, we've had this conversation multiple times. I mean, it's an ongoing sort of, it's kind of a product of our own success in some of those things, that it just seems like such a logical way to approach a question that often geography is, it's not, you're not realizing that you're doing something from a geography perspective, because it just, makes sense. And so in the world of higher ed, where we sort of have to distinguish ourselves, at least here, that could be a difficult thing. Like, what do you mean? What do you mean it's geography?
So we were at a round table this week with, so a big push in higher education, particularly in small liberal arts colleges, is regional institutions. In the United States, at least, a big push is towards connecting directly with industry a bit more to try to figure out what they need, so make sure you're making students who have the skills that can get jobs and that sort of thing. So we were at a round table for criminal justice and intelligence people, and they invited Barb and I to this group chat conversation thing. So I was talking, as we were in lunch line, I was talking to a gentleman that's involved in primarily intel work. He works for a company, and he was like, what we really need, he was talking to another guy, and I was just behind them. He's like, what we really need is we need a way to understand the cultural and the political and the economics of a place, but tied to its location. And I was sitting there and I'm going, I just interjected and went, well, you mean geography? And he was like, what? I was like, you're talking about geography. You need geography because geography is going to do exactly what you need it to do, what you're saying. He goes, does it have technology and a data system to handle it? I was like, yes, that's called GIS. And so it's kind of great that people are asking this question. It's incredibly frustrating that, geography as a discipline has been around for over 100 and something years within the United States alone, going further back, it arguably goes back centuries, but we still have to make the case, Well,
it's just terrifying that if they're an intel person and they don't know one of the core ints of GeoInt, what?
Well,
they know GeoInt, but they didn't know that was geography.
Yeah.
And they didn't really just know, that's the part, they didn't really know the geo bit.
Yeah.
Really.
That's fair.
I just want to say, because again, this gets into that conversation of how it's so hard to make people understand what geography is because of everything we impact. Would someone please create a really popular TV show with
that's geography
in it, doing these types of things that's explicitly geography, not labeled as math or whatever, but it's exactly, like numbers was, but it's geography that's so popular that we have a whole bunch of people that go, oh, that's geography, and then it runs in reruns.
We need our NCIS is what we're saying.
The problem is you can't, because it's too big. You can't have this as geography because they'd be doing something different every week. So they still wouldn't recognize the fact that it's geography because they'd focus on that week's use of statistics or a survey or a 3D total station scanning system or whatever they might be using. And so would they, can we ever actually, I mean, we can make a definition, but can we make a show that is showing geography without it being everything?
We can, and that show is called Numbers.
Well, I mean, we're sort of swimming against
those parts as well.
In the U.S., we're swimming against the current, right, of starting in K-12, geography, which is a big part of all of the state's goals, is in something called social studies. And so if students go on to, and this is, the higher ed perspective, if students go on to college, they may still get geographic principles, but they may not even get a geography class because not every university has a geography department. And so, we're already swimming upstream against that long trend in the U.S., and it might be similar in other places. But, that definition, because in conversations all the time, so a geographer will hear what you're talking about and go, yeah, that's geography. And they'll be like, what? And they won't deny any piece of it, but it's not on the radar as something separate. And so some of that is that evolution, right? And the evolution of geography programs in the U.S., some of which were eliminated, and there, there's a whole history related to that. And then, GIS brought some things back, but not necessarily as geography departments.
But it's even more than that. I think there are places that don't have geography departments, but even where there are geography departments, even large, massive geography departments that are one institutions, things like that, they're not required to take a geography. Geography is an option, and so they may not ever, through a 4-year degree, need to take a geography class to find out that the thing that they thought about was in fact geography, as opposed to one of these other things that they're like, oh, okay, it's this.
And more frustrating, they are taking geography. It's just embedded in everything else, and isn't acknowledged as geography, right? So, your business major's right. They may never take a geography class ever, but everybody hears location as the prime principle of, everything. So they are getting exposed to it. They just don't know it's called that, and it's not labeled properly as that in those other disciplines.
And so, speaking of what you're saying, my intro to geography class, which is very broad and tries to touch on all the different disciplines that our students might be from. And also, I try to make it very enjoyable. I try to keep it in the spirit of things like National Geographic and a lot of the geography podcasts and vlogs that you see online, and make it useful so they have resources and references they can take with them for whatever they're doing in the future or for fun. And they all say the same thing. They did not realize geography was all this, because people are still thinking it is, where on the map. But when they start to see it so broad, they start to see that binding agent. They start to think that way. Plus, I've added that in, hello spatial thinkers that a lot of geographers are using just to reinforce it. Because I'm like, I might have this one opportunity to promote geography for their profession so that they know what it is. And when they go out to work, they reach out to geographers when they're needed because they know what they do.
Okay, I'm going to take a hard left turn with my question. Didn't forget, which is something that has fascinated me a little bit, and I don't know the answer, and I'm kind of looking at Sue to hopefully give some insight here, because she's the resident historian. She actually has a degree in history and advanced degrees in history. So, if everything happens somewhere, I started off by saying that, right? So we're talking about space, where everything happens at some time. We're talking about time. Those are the two big ones, right? Everything's somewhere in time. If we can think just abstractly, very much so, that geography is the study of space fundamentally, well, then history arguably is the discipline most aligned with studying time fundamentally. I'm kind of curious why geography can kind of position itself to make the real argument that we have today, which is this is the binding agent for everything. But history, I don't listen to a lot of history podcasts, so maybe I'm getting this wrong, but history doesn't seem to position itself that way, or doesn't seem to have any terrible interest in positioning itself that way with respect to time. Anybody have any idea why? Am I off base here? Or does that just seem weird?
I, of course, would counter that to say that archaeology or geology could also be time.
Are you still there?
With geology as space-time?
Well, the reality is they're all space-time. Yeah. But well, I would say I've been away from the active end of this for quite a while, but I think one of the things is that as I remember, the perspective in history is that you must be looking back, right, to be able to critically examine the events, the time. All right, so one of the things why history wouldn't position itself necessarily is because anything currently going on, you can't have that perspective. So change is seen, I think, differently, right? And so one of the things in geography, right, is we are looking at the dynamics, both the interplay of different processes, but also how those processes are changing. And that's often a big part of how we examine things. And I think history looks at something with a lens that says, I'd like to look back and say, well, how did this happen? Why did this happen? Why did it happen then? Kind of thing. So that doesn't necessarily lend itself to looking at the dynamics of a current time, if that makes sense.
So what you're saying is that it doesn't do that because it's not what it's trying to do out of the gate.
Yes, as I would understand, I've been actively out of the field for a while, so modern historians may not agree with me on that, but I mean, when I look at the differences, that's some of what I see.
So I'm kind of curious with regard to the greater conversation about geography and wanting it to it being a binding agent and wanting people to understand it's a binding agent. I'm wondering how much that given time isn't necessarily explicitly tied to any discipline as its kind of domain, where space is. I'm wondering if that's part of the problem, is that people just think, well, everybody talks about space, so we don't need somebody to talk about space, just like everybody talks about time, so we don't need anyone to talk about time. I wonder if that's some of our stumbling block. Just food for thought.
Yeah. Again, I think some of it is that we inherit our worldviews, our approaches and things from what we've been taught and sort of the milieu that we are part of. So a lot of it is that each next generation of, and this is just geography, right? It's a scholarly discipline, right? Each generation will then work off of that. And so I think some of it is just in the evolution of the disciplines.
Okay, so there you go. Geography as an interdisciplinary binding agent. We have ideas, we have questions. That is good. Have questions. But on, of course, to the events corner. We encourage you to check out events everywhere.
First up is CalGIS 2026. That's going to take place January 20th through the 23rd in 2026, obviously, in Redlands, California. The call for papers is out if you'd like to present to it.
GISSuRF, the International Conference and Application of Geospatial Technologies for Sustainable Communities and Resilient Future, is taking place January 30th through 31st in Andhra Pradesh, India.
And the 2026 GIS Valuation Technologies Conference will be March 30th through April 2nd in Mobile, Alabama.
And all of those still have call for papers going on, as Frank noted at the beginning. Of course, if you'd like us to add your event to the podcast, send us an email to podcast@veryspatial.com.
If you'd like to reach us individually, I can be reached at sue@veryspatial.com.
I can be reached at barb@veryspatial.com.
You can reach me at frank@veryspatial.com.
I'm available at Kinda Spatial, and of course, if you'd like to find all of our contact information, head over to veryspatial.com/contacts.
As always,
We're the folks from Very Spatial.
Thanks for listening.
And we'll see you in a couple weeks.
I know that the telephone box is out of order, and all of those ticking clocks are only there for the nostalgia. Always thought this was made to last, but now it's in the past, and it might be for the best, but it's still pushing down on my chest. I told you so many times, don't go. I can't stop thinking of you, and you know it. I don't know what I did that was so wrong, but now I can't stop thinking of you now. I know that people change faster than technology, and maybe I'm just over dramatic, but it makes me worry. 'Cause I have to say that I didn't see this coming. I thought that we were cool, but then you started shoving me out of your way. What can I say? I told you so many times, don't go. I can't stop thinking of you, and you know it. I don't know what I did that was so wrong, but now I can't stop thinking of you now. don't know